Okay, so what I want to talk to you guys about today is the difference between this guy and this guy. I find it really interesting how Shakespeare decided to portray him like that when actually, from what I've been reading, he was nothing like that at all. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Shakespeare. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. But the portrayal of Henry V, in particular Prince Hal, although I love it, it makes me go, what the fuck, not the fuck? And other sort of strange emotional outbursts. I think what surprised me was the fact that Henry V was actually really pious and really conscientious of his duties as future king, which doesn't necessarily come across in the Shakespeare tetralogy. Henry IV, parts 1 and 2, and of course Henry V. I think also a lot of Shakespeare's work portrays him as a kind of scapegrace, if that's the word you can use, and he wasn't that at all. Yeah, there were periods where he didn't get along with his father. They had several arguments, predictably, over how to run the country. But he never messed around in taverns, or did anything that was seen as unbecoming of a future king. So, quite where Shakespeare got that idea from, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously his job was to entertain, but stretching the truth that far? I'm kind of struggling to see what the point was, because there was no truth to it at all. And seeing as it was a historical play, you would have thought that Shakespeare would have sought to tell the history, rather than making a lot of it up in the first two parts of Henry V's life. I say life, I mean plays. And as amusing as Henry IV parts 1 and 2 are, I kind of wish that Shakespeare had shown more of the man who led an army at 16, you know, got an arrow in his face and almost died from it, which I know he did cover briefly in Henry V when he was wooing Catherine. You know, he made mentions to the scar on his face. But even so, I just wish that there had been more of a kind of truth to all this, for want of a better word. It frustrates me a little bit, even though, as I've said, I love the plays. They are some of my absolute favourite. Parts 1 and 2, he was sarcastic towards his father. He was loud and he was wild in his behaviour in the taverns, and that was probably the diametric opposite of the actual Henry, because in all honesty he was pious, he was quiet, he didn't laugh very often, although he was courteous to women, didn't really enjoy their company, and he wasn't really as easygoing as the plays portrayed him, you know. He had a lot on his mind, considering France, and of course his own country, and his future marriage to Catherine, which he was desperate to secure. He'd known of Catherine for years, before they'd even met, and he wanted to marry her, purely for political reasons, because he saw it as a way to gain France. However, one thing I will say is that the wooing scene portrayed between Henry and Catherine in Henry V did actually take place in real life. Obviously, the accuracy of Shakespeare's exact depiction is questionable, but the language barrier did occur between the two of them. He couldn't speak very good French, she couldn't speak very good English, but it was to their advantage, because they were both amused by it, and they were attracted to each other. And in the end, you know, they married, and they were happy with each other, which Henry had not been expecting. I mean, you could call it a love match, and he was not expecting that at all. I may talk more about this some other time, but I think for the moment I've probably covered as much as I can do. Although, obviously, I would like to go back to it because I find it absolutely fascinating, and he is probably one of my favourite historical characters ever. I mean, come on, the guy got an arrow in his face and survived at the age of 16. He led his own army at the age of 16. How awesome is that? Unfortunately, he died a rather unfortunate death, but maybe I'll talk about that next time.